But I think we need to transition because, Emilio, we got haters in these streets.
Oh.
Do we have non-believers in these streets that we need to convert to the pod god schedule, to the rabbit hole itself? Are there some Alices that need to go to Wonderland? No, but a topic was brought up that Emilio, you brought up to me that had to do with, I don't know, just questioning the nature of, like, I don't know, men podcasting, period. But then it just, like, went us into thinking about our own podcasting, reasons we did it. I don't know how much we've even actually shared with people. So can you just, like, reintro how we got into this when you brought it up to me yesterday?
I had been, I was talking to someone, and we were talking about the rabbit hole sessions, and
That's this podcast, in case y'all didn't know.
Of course.
Yeah.
And they had mentioned a tweet that they saw, which I think I have a picture.
You got it? Yeah.
Yeah, so we found the tweet so it's just interesting. This is what it says. I'm pretty sure that podcasts now are just an excuse for adult men to call each other on the phone and have a meaningful 1-hour conversation, unquote.
If you're not watching the YouTube, I just threw my hands up and, like, palms to the air and just shaking my head. But we'll go back to that point. But that led you into what?
Just the genesis of this podcast, what kind of how it all started, and I think it's just because, well, for us in our particular context, that doesn't apply to us.
Not at all.
Yeah, like, because our where we originally came from was just hanging out in the commons back in the day, and just, like, having conversations, and then eventually starting to record those conversations on phones in
Voice
between
notes,
like on
yeah.
the bench, and then, you know, that thankfully we had school resources that allowed us to tap into these things that we wanted to try, and we had an outlet to express ourselves that was better than our phones. And so it's just something we would do without microphones, but we thought, why not add microphones to it?
Yeah, shout out to WSFR, like you said, that we had the resources and they gave us the access to start. I mean, shout out to Food for Thought.
Yeah.
Way back in the day. That was our first live radio show. And I think that was, our sophomore year of college? You were still at Suffolk then.
Yeah.
So I think
so. It must
sophomore
have been sophomore.
Yeah, so it's like, that was definitely the foundation. Like you said, it started with, we just would speak like this. It's funny because our friendship started with basically basketball, right? Like, we got introduced to a friend and we would just go shoot hoops and shit. And then eventually it turned into just discussions, greater friendship that I didn't, and obviously the creative things joined and grew, and it turned into, and manifested into on mic. And it's, we're not at our 52nd episode yet, but we could even reference back to this one when we get there. I think a lot of personal development has happened because of this podcast. Not even just what we're talking about on mic, but in terms of figuring out how to set it up, figuring out how to run one, like, how are we going to get this dynamic? Because it's important
to the fields that we're going into.
Exactly. And it's important to know how to communicate your ideas, which is another thing, and that's something that's important when I relate to people. So I want to make sure, one, I'm communicating effectively. That's like an insecurity I have. It's like, if I don't communicate myself properly. And I also want to make sure the other person feels comfortable enough that they think they did as well, right? And this podcast feeds into all of that. And it's definitely part of the root of why we started, because, speaking with you and just as our friendship grew, I did start to feel like, I'm good. And I always try to surround myself with the people who make me less self-conscious about if I communicated correctly. But that usually comes with time. That usually comes with, and, this isn't big up Emilio's session, but testament to you, dog, because you, like, I don't know what your first impressions of me. We don't have to go down that route, but to have the wherewithal to, like, still, be willing to listen and be willing to indulge in ideas. I think it's something we spoke about on this podcast before. And I mean, that's part of the genesis of this for me, is always have wanted to make it a platform for discussing and willingness to listen to ideas. And I think that's something we've carried on pretty well, and I don't like I get the joke and I get the sentiment of the tweet. Don't get me wrong. I get it. Male emotions and male depth and revealing shit to each other is not the most common thing in society. I get it. But, I mean, that shit just is like, come on. I mean, that's just man hate at that point. It's just, like, what's the point of that tweet? What's the point? What's the point, right?
Who knows?
What's the point? Okay, before we veer off into the man hate segment, is there anything you want to say more about just how this originated or the genesis? By the way, this is like the third iteration of the show we've gone through.
Yeah, that's
so it's
true.
Like y'all are seeing the
two things.
more finished product.
2 things. One, I think this podcast, that kind of to what you were talking about, is just like it's an opportunity for personal growth. As you said, we've gone through 3 iterations. We've shed our skin 3 different times, And the second thing is that the hope and the belief that there are other people out there like us who communicate like us and are interested in similar things like us and, are willing. We're hoping to reach them in a way. And I don't know if we're at that point, but I think there's a future for it. To reach that point.
And I think we've set the foundation and still setting the foundation. Like you said, I don't think we're at the point yet, but I think we're building it and building it with that vision in mind. Podcast is such a long game, like in terms of it being successful and getting an audience that invests in you, but also you finding an audience that you invest in. That's important, right? And that means defining yourself as a show, defining yourself as people, and that's also why this personal growth aspect feeds into it, right? Like I listen back to every episode. I get to hear how I think, right, from an outsider's perspective, right? Because even when going through them in the editing stage, it's like you don't really realize. It's kind of just, you're just not really, you're just editing it. You're not listening to the show. You mentioned it about the film earlier when you were editing but not really watching back. It's kind of the same thing. But I listen to every episode once it comes out. So I hear everything y'all hear. I hear the dumb shit. I hear the smart shit. I hear the somewhere in the middle shit. And that's personal growth. Like it shows you how to change, like I said, how to effectively communicate or change or keep the same. Maybe you like how you sound on the podcast. And I'm just grateful for that. And I think we got a great show, man. Grateful for you being here, James.
Thank you. Yeah.
I would say it if you were here. Obviously, I'm grateful for you, but I can't say for being here right now.
That's
but
funny.
Adding James onto the addition in this iteration, I think was a great decision.
Yeah, the third
That was a
band member.
fantastic decision we made. Like to add third homie who could help us step it up, who is of like-mindedness, who is of the same type of willingness to indulge and divulge ideas, like give shit up, and then also is passionate about the craft and is willing to sit behind the cam while we sit on mic.
Yeah, well, and it's also his specialty too.
Is what?
Camera-related things.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I'm glad he has no actor ego of wanting to be on camera. That's good. James, shout out to you for that. All right, once we get to 52, maybe we'll upgrade it to you to permanent cam. I don't think the episode where he was on camera even came out.
Yeah.
So I think it's a sign, James.